here we are. We're in the end of August 2014, just finished our honey harvest. So there's a kind of selection of the pots we used to put our honey in Brittany here. But anyway, now I'm going to talk about feeders, sugar, how much sugar we give, how much we don't. Is a selection of the feeders I use. Just quickly run through these. This is a wooden frame cover and a feeder for a 10 frame hive. This is really a fantastic piece of kit because it means it stays on the hive the whole year round. When you want to feed, you basically tip all the sugar in top. When you don't, you just leave it on. It's as simple as that. So it's really kind of a great tool, and it works fine throughout the winter. You can put insulation on top of that if you want to, but really you don't have to. The other three I've got here are what they're called top feeders. Well, I should say there's two top feeders there and one front feeder. The front feeder is great, but it's more of a tool in the spring or at night. The problem with front feeders is they are more open to robbing. So this one, for instance, you fill this up inverted, put the bottom on it, and then you can flip it over carefully and slide it into the front of the hive. The problem with that is, as I say, if it's done in the morning or early afternoon, in this time of year, bees are on everything they can get and they rob like mad. So really it's not ideal, and it really stresses the hive out. So the best thing is to use all feeders at night and do all feeding at night time. The other two here I've got are basically straightforward top feeders. This one obviously holds much more. This holds about 2 litres. That only holds about 3/4 of a litre, but they both work really well. So how much sugar should you give your bees? Well, it's a big question really. What I do is I look at my colonies. If I've got a colony that's very light, I basically feed it, and I feed it till I feel the frames are getting heavy. This year it looks like we've got a really good ivy flow going to start in a couple of weeks, so I'm not too worried, but I'm feeding now because the earlier you start and the slower you give the feed, I feel that it actually is beneficial to give it slower. Then they've got a chance to basically continually store away, and then the queen still has room to lay. If you give too much sugar too soon, very often you almost block the queen from laying, and you don't want to do that this time of year because the queen needs to lay quite a bit into the autumn now. So those bees she's laying now are the bees that are going to overwinter. So what I do is I buy this cheap sugar from the supermarket. It's basically powdered sugar. It's probably the sweepings off the floor where it's where the normal granulated sugar is sorted and milled or whatever. But powdered sugar is good because it's got a bigger surface area. You get more in the bag than you would if it was granulated. And I buy this for 89 cents a bag. So 3 of those, about €2.50. So I then tip three of those into one 5 litre bag, and then what I do is I use a funnel. And the big thing with this is do it over a sink. If you're not divorced yet, if you don't do it over a sink, you probably will be quite soon after, because it gets everywhere. It's basically it's so dusty, this powdered sugar, so be aware that it just goes everywhere. It goes all over the floor, it gets sticky everywhere. So that's what I do basically. Tip that in with a funnel, and then I use a complete kettle full of water into this 5 litre jug. So that's just about 1.6 litres of boiling water straight into the top of the sugar. Okay, now then obviously you just get the cap, which I've missed. There it is. Stick that on. Just squeeze a little bit of the air out of the tub if you can. And then what you do is just shake it up and down. But before you do that, the safest thing of all is to stick a tea towel over it. And then really just give it a good shake, agitate it. If it does splash a bit, you haven't put the lid on properly, you're not going to get burnt. Boiling water is the best thing of all because it really helps dissolve. There's quite a bit talked about the strength of your feed, and as a rule, if you want to get it stronger, that's probably better. If you've got time to put a big pot on the stove, pour as much sugar in as you can into hot water and keep stirring and stirring, that's great. But this time of year, we're starting. We've got another month really of giving sugar. Well, 3 to 4 weeks of giving sugar if the weather's reasonable, but it's in liquid form. So there's no rush, and as long as you can get it fairly strong, the lighter syrups obviously you'd use in the spring, but really as strong as you can, because the bees don't think they've got to dry it, they've got to store it away, and they've got to get the water percentage to less than 17% so it doesn't ferment. So really, that's it. There's not much else to it. It's really simple. Just keep your strength strong. Don't give too much too soon. And I'm going to do a little extra now. I'll show you giving the syrup when I'm up at my bees. Right, so I'm up at my bees now. I just thought I'd show you the kind of environment we've got here in Brittany. Lots of blackberry that was pollinated in the spring extremely well by the bees. You can see is absolutely full of fruit this year. We've had a real load of rain in August after good weather in some of July. Wasn't been the best summer, to be honest, but it's still been good enough. Pollination excellent. Now we've had the moisture to fatten everything up. So you can see the blackberries here, they're all ripening up. And you can in fact see a lot of sloe on the bushes down here. Just show you that. Look at the size of all these sloe berries. So there's plenty of food for everything this year. And we're now right at the end of August. We've just done the honey harvest. Not particularly good, but a lot of honey has been stored in the hive bodies this year rather than the supers, so there's not a lot of feeding to do. So what I've done is I've gone through a lot of my hives and just seen which ones have a lot of light frames in, and I worked on that. It looks like also that the ivy is going to be pretty good this year. We've got a lot of moisture in the ground, which is unusual. We've had over 105 mil rain in August in this particular place, and usually we have nothing at all in August. So the ivy is just about to start flower a couple of weeks early, but when it does, and with a good weather forecast like we'll have next week, could be pretty spectacular. So we could have hives going into the winter absolutely full of food, mostly free of charge, which is fantastic. The big thing with beekeeping is knowing how much sugar to give your bees in the winter. So what I'm doing here, I'm actually feeding a few of my nukes that I know are light, that haven't had much sugar stored in the frames. What they've done is they've spent most of their time producing young and trying to catch up with the brood production. So as a beekeeper, you need to identify that and go through your nukes or your hives and see which ones have got a lot of bees and no sugar. So that's what I've done, and obviously I'm feeding a few. So here we are. I've got a little feeder on top. It only feeds about half a litre a time. This is the sugar I mixed up before, so I'm just going to pour that in. This will be empty by the morning, and you can see the bees already are starting to sniff it out. Sometimes you just need to just lift off the main cap and just put a little drop, a couple of teaspoons into the top of the actual hive to show them where it is, and once they find it, they'll be all over it like a rash. But anyway, there you are. You can see, or I don't know if you can see, but the bees there are starting to drink that up. But there'll be a load appearing at the top of this feeder in about 20 minutes or so, when they soon find out that there's plenty of sugar waiting to be taken down. So I'll probably give this hive another couple of feeds this year, and then I'll check them all again in about 3 or 4 weeks, just before we start thinking about putting mouse guards up in October, end of October, and that really is going to be it for the year. But I hope this little video on sugar, giving sugar, is a little bit of a help, because I certainly was completely confused. But I think the thing is to give it slowly when you've got the time, and not give a massive amount too much, because you can really flood the hive too much with it. And the bees don't need a huge amount. They need a certain amount to survive the winter, that's for sure. But you've got to look at the conditions, look at the forecast, make an assessment yourself, and go for it. And if you think that they're not going to need too much, then don't give them, because they should be able to provide for themselves anyway. All you're doing is giving a bit of help. So bear that in mind. Anyway, there we are. You know, this is the kind of problem we get sometimes. We're getting a lot of ants underneath the lid of the feeder this year. Why, I don't know. It seems to be perhaps it's been a really mild succession of winters. You can see we've got queen ants here and eggs. It's obviously the ants are coming to the end of their life cycle, and they're producing queens. That's the ones with the wings on. But they're really not a problem, and they're just a bit of a pain when you take the lid off, because you get covered in ants. But I don't think the bees really tolerate them in the colony at all. But I suppose you could say they are cleaning up any surplus sugar. And you know, well, live and let live really. But they're a bit of a pain for me really. But there you go. Anyway, what are the joys of feeding?